welcome back to Adaptation, where we talk about film adaptations and the original material they're based on. I'm Kendyl Bryant, and if you've been around here lately, you know we've been talking a lot about one of my favorite books, Little Women. We released a podcast discussing the novel and making some predictions for the web series March Family Letters, and then 2 weeks ago I released a vlog discussing the 1933 and 1949 film versions, and this week I'm here to follow it up by discussing the 1978 TV miniseries and the 1994 film. This was the first time that I watched the miniseries, and I have so many thoughts. Directed by David Lowell Rich and starring Susan Dey, Meredith Baxter, Eve Plumb, and William Shatner, this is a two-part series that equals about 3 hours and 15 minutes of screen time, so they're able to pack a lot more in than the other versions. And it does a really good job of telling as much of the story as it can. It, of course, still has to leave some stuff out because it's a really long book, and it makes a couple of weird choices, like putting the 3-year time jump a little bit earlier on in the story. But as its own piece, I think it tells a really smooth story, and it stays really true to the tone of the book, despite the fact that all the guys are sporting very 70s mustaches and sideburns. As per usual, Jo is still the more featured sister, but the extended time gives the others a little bit more to do in this version. In fact, I think this might be my favorite version of Meg. She really felt like the oldest sister to me, being a little bit more firm and pointed with the other ones, and that might not be entirely accurate to her character. I'm not really sure. If you listen to the podcast, you know that I find Meg the most confusing of the sisters, but this version made me like her. Another thing I liked about this version is Aunt March. I tend to think she's a little too harshly portrayed in the other ones, whereas in the book she does have a little bit of a softer side. And this version shows her succumbing to a love of novels because of Jo and showing genuine concern about Mr. March's health. She's judgmental and opinionated, yes, but she's not a caricature. Something that I mentioned in the last vlog was that I hate how out of nowhere the Laurie and Amy relationship is in a lot of the films, but this one was able to keep in a lot of their Europe scenes, actually a really large portion of them. Amy gets to tell Laurie off for not making himself more useful. They both have to realize that their talents aren't exactly genius, and Laurie's opera makes him realize that Amy is his heroine, not Jo. I still don't fully buy the development of their love, but this version tries harder than any of the others. So there were definitely some really good things going on here, but of course I have some complaints as well. Firstly, Beth. Bless Eve Plumb's middle child heart, but Beth is supposed to be shy and soft-spoken, and that is not what was happening here. There is one scene where she's like scared of Mr. Lawrence, but still overall she's way too bouncy for me. And along those same lines, I really don't think that they set up the Beth and Jo relationship very well, even though the two do get to go to the shore later in the film, which is great. But earlier on, pre-Scarlet Fever, it kind of gets lost. But my biggest complaint is something that I'm really not sure I can get over and makes me want to do physical harm to William Shatner. I did hit him with my car once, but that's a completely different story. The point is that I don't know what's going on with all the yelling that he does in this movie as Professor Bear. Now, the professor does lecture, and I don't always agree with him in the book, but this just went way too far. I left feeling really concerned about Jo's future happiness and a little bit for her safety. He seems to yell at her for just like being herself, which makes me really uncomfortable. Laurie is also overly angry at times in this movie, but that's semi-consistent with his character, so I'm able to look past it. At least he wasn't creepy like he is in the 1994 version. Yes, we finally made it to this version, directed by Gillian Anderson, starring Winona Ryder, Susan Sarandon, Claire Danes, Kirsten Dunst, Gabriel Byrne, and Christian Bale, who I have very mixed feelings about. One thing I think this version does loads better than any of the others is portray Laurie and the sisters going from children to adults. This is, of course, most obvious with Amy, as they completely changed the actress playing her, but also in the acting of Winona Ryder and Christian Bale, who really come off as youthful in the beginning. Maybe not 16, but better than the other versions where they seem grown up from the start. And then they grow up and Laurie becomes a creep. We probably should have seen that coming when he promised to kiss Amy. And when he later tries to deliver on this promise, it's super uncomfortable. A lot of the dialogue he's given in the scenes with Amy in Europe is pretty awful and really makes it seem like he loves her for her family despite the fact that he denies that fact. It seriously makes me wish that she had just run off with Fred Vaughn, which is pretty unfortunate because the version at the beginning of the movie could really be my perfect Teddy had they not made him super weird and awful at the end. Okay, he's a bit of a whiny dude bro in the book too, but at least they give him the character development to, like, grow out of it. Other than that, however, I really do like how this film is adapted, though it's arguably the least accurate to the book. Like Jess said in the podcast, it's really obvious that the filmmakers understood the source material and wanted to adapt the themes for a modern audience. Basically anything that Marmee says is pure gold, despite the fact that most of it isn't in the book at all. And I think it is worth pointing out that this is the only version directed by a woman, which I think really comes through. And though I could probably continue to go on about each little bit of dialogue that was added that I love, I should probably wrap this up. So the 1978 version is probably the most accurate in terms of plot. The 1994 is the least accurate, but portrays the themes really well. I personally think the 1949 version does the best as far as characters are concerned, and the 1933 version does the best with the Joe and Laurie relationship. But what watching all of these versions has taught me is that Laurie has really never been portrayed to my satisfaction, and neither has Amy, even though I kind of like her in the 94 version, just not her relationship with Laurie. And after doing the podcast with Jess, I realized that that relationship is really important to me. But again, I want to hear what you guys think, so let me know in the comments what your favorite version is and if there are any others I should check out. Please go listen to our podcast on iTunes and stick around for when we bring all of this back up again at the end of March Family Letters. The link to the podcast and all our other social media is in the info section. Until next time, answer me this. Is Shatner the original Gambon? Mr. Bear spoke warmly. Unless that means passionately. I always thought it meant, like, comfortingly. Maybe everything I've ever known is a lie.